In the depths of the human psyche, marriage is not merely a social contract or a romantic ideal. It is a crucible for transformation, a sacred journey toward individuation. Carl Jung perceived marriage as a profound psychological relationship, a dynamic interplay between two souls striving for wholeness. At its core, marriage serves as a mirror, reflecting the unconscious aspects of ourselves that we often overlook. Through the intimate bond with another, we encounter our own shadows, projections, and inner conflicts. This confrontation is not a flaw of the union, but its very purpose to bring to light the hidden facets of our being and to integrate them into a cohesive self. Jung emphasized that true psychological relationship in marriage requires consciousness. Without awareness, partners remain entangled in unconscious patterns, unable to truly relate. As consciousness expands, so does the capacity for genuine connection, allowing each individual to see and accept the other as they truly are. The journey of marriage, according to Jung, is not about finding completion in another, but about supporting each other's path to self-realization. It is a partnership where both individuals commit to personal growth, facing challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities for deeper understanding and unity. In this sacred union, love transcends mere affection. It becomes a force that propels both partners toward their highest potential. Marriage, then, is not the end of the journey, but a transformative process, guiding each soul toward the fullness of their being. And when you enter it not just in ceremony, but in consciousness, you realize that marriage is not about comfort. It's about confrontation. The confrontation with yourself, with your history, with the ghosts that still speak in your tone of voice, with the wounds that masquerade as preferences. Because marriage is not a merging of two perfect people. It is the holy collision of two incomplete beings, willing to face their incompleteness together, willing to admit, I do not know how to love fully yet, but I am here to learn with you, through you. And in this, it becomes clear, marriage is not about being saved. It is about being seen, truly, nakedly, terrifyingly seen, not just for who you aspire to be, but for who you are when the mask cracks, who you are when the light goes out, who you are when your shadow stands taller than your ego can manage. This is where the work begins, not in passion, but in presence, not in chemistry, but in conscious co-creation, because the other person is not just your lover. They are your mirror, your reflector, your challenger, and your witness. They carry the keys to rooms within you you didn't even know were locked, and they will open them, not always gently, not always on time, but always exactly when your soul is ready. That's what makes marriage terrifying and sacred, because it asks not for your perfection, but your participation. It demands not that you agree, but that you engage, that you show up again and again, even when the romance fades, even when the illusion shatters, even when all that's left is raw, exposed humanity, because that's where real love begins. Not in the promise, but in the process of becoming, the process of breaking and rebuilding, not once, not twice, but over and over, as many times as it takes to burn through illusion and reach the molten core of truth. Marriage, according to Jung, is not about harmony. It's about integration. It's the arena where the masculine and feminine within each partner are confronted, challenged, provoked into union, not gendered roles, but archetypal forces, the inner animus and anima, the order and the chaos, the sun and the moon, And when these forces clash within a shared life, what erupts is not a war, but an alchemical fire, a fire that exposes where you've remained unconscious, where you've relied on projection instead of perception, where you've mistaken your partner for your savior, your wound dresser, your emotional servant. But real marriage kills those fantasies because it was never meant to fulfill you. It was meant to free you, to drag you through the forge of shared mirrors until you no longer need the other to reflect you, because you began to see yourself clearly. This is why so many run, because marriage reveals the parts of you you would rather keep hidden. It forces a reckoning, not just with the other, but with yourself. And yet, in that reckoning, there is something miraculous. Because if you show up through the storms, through the shadows, through the unbearable stillness where nothing feels romantic or even kind, you discover something no fantasy can give you. Sacred partnership. The bond that says, I see your darkness and I'm not leaving. I see your brilliance and I'm not jealous. I see your wounds and I hold them without fixing. I see your growth and I rise with it. That is when marriage transcends its earthly form. It becomes a spiritual discipline, not because it is always gentle, but because it is always honest. It stops being about compatibility and starts being about capacity. Capacity to hold tension without collapsing. Capacity to speak truth without punishment. Capacity to listen without defense. Capacity to forgive without forgetting who you are. In Jung's world, marriage is the ultimate individuation crucible. Because where else in life are you this exposed, this tested, this mirrored, this called out, not out of cruelty, but out of love so fierce? It refuses to let you remain unconscious. It's not a fairy tale. It's not a contract. It's not a cure for loneliness. It's a portal, a place where your ego is slowly dismantled, so your essence can finally be revealed, where your projections are shattered, so your presence can finally be embodied, where the child in you, who was never held, learns to hold themselves while letting another hold them too. It is the highest, hardest school of devotion, not because it gives you what you want, but because it shapes you into who you were meant to become. Not a version of yourself edited for comfort, but a version sculpted through friction, forged through honesty, polished by presence. And when two people accept that path, not as punishment, but as privilege, they enter a rare kind of love, not because it's perfect, but because it is conscious. And conscious love, it doesn't just change relationships. It changes everything, because once you've loved like that, with your eyes open, with your shadow integrated, with your truth uncloaked, you can no longer settle for anything that smells like performance. You crave presence. You crave depth. You crave reality. You don't want someone to complete you. You want someone to witness you as you complete yourself. You want someone to hold your hand, not because you're afraid of the dark, but because you've chosen to walk through it. And it's more powerful to do so in communion. Marriage, then, becomes a spiritual dojo, a place where the soul trains in discipline, in devotion, in the art of staying when leaving would be easier. Not staying in toxicity, but staying in transformation. Because no mirror can show you more than the one who sees you every day through the seasons of love through the ego deaths, through the rebirths. No ceremony is more sacred than waking up beside someone who chooses you again, not because they forgot your flaws, but because they remembered them and stayed anyway. And that staying isn't passive. It is active worship. It is choosing to grow beside another, not by demanding change, but by becoming change, by making your own healing your highest gift, by making your wholeness the offering you lay at their feet, by saying with every word, every silence, every mundane moment, I am not here to fix you. I am here to face myself so I can love you with clean hands. This is the highest purpose of marriage in Jung's eyes. Not escape, not fantasy, but conscious evolution. Two souls, not fused in dependency, but dancing in differentiation. And in that dance, creating something divine, something that does not belong to either of them individually, but only exists in the sacred tension between them. Jung called this the transcendent function, the emergence of a third entity born not from compromise, but from integration, a relationship that becomes an archetype of wholeness itself. Not a merging that erases identities, but a union that amplifies them, where your solitude is not threatened by connection, but honored within it, where your growth does not compete with theirs, but summons it. And in this dynamic, you both become more than you could ever be alone, not because you are unfinished, but because you are unfolding, unfolding in the presence of someone who does not fear your depth, who does not shrink at your transformation, who does not flinch when the old parts of you die, so something wiser can emerge. Marriage then becomes the arena of radical becoming, not despite the conflict, but through it, not in spite of the discomfort, but because of it. Because every argument, every rupture, every silent night, and honest confrontation is an initiation, an invitation to drop the mask, to meet the moment, to remember that the goal was never to be comfortable. It was to be conscious. And as you rise through those moments, as you step deeper into your truth and theirs, you begin to feel the sacred irony. You did not find yourself in spite of marriage. You found yourself because of it, because someone stayed long enough for your reflection to become unbearable, and then beautiful. And now you see it clearly. This isn't about love stories. This is about soul smithing, about shaping the unseen, about forging a flame that can't be extinguished by time, routine, or even pain. A flame that lights the way, not just for the two of you, but for what is possible when love becomes a vehicle for awakening. Because when love becomes awakening, it ceases to be about possession. It ceases to be about comfort. It becomes a practice, a spiritual path that strips you bare, not to expose your weakness, but to reveal your wholeness, where every wound becomes a doorway, where every trigger becomes a teacher, where every moment of rupture is not a sign to run, but a call to remember. Remember why you chose them. Remember why they chose you. Not to complete each other, but to confront yourselves in each other's presence with sacred precision. This is not soft love. This is sovereign love. This is the kind of love that doesn't flinch when your darkness surfaces, because it knows that's where the gold is buried. This is the kind of marriage that doesn't stay for fear of loneliness, but for the power of mirroring, because When you are truly seen, not just through affection, but through confrontation, through grief, through mundane repetition. And still, someone stands across from you and says, I'm here, not to fix you, not to flee you, but to meet you. Then you realize you've touched the divine, not in some far-off heaven, not in the myths or the fairy tales, but in the soil and sweat of real love. Love that's been tested, torn, tempered, and made unbreakable. And this rare, radiant, soul-igniting bond is what Jung meant. This is the real purpose of marriage, to turn the unconscious conscious, to transform projection into perception, to make the invisible visible, to become whole, together, not as two halves seeking fusion, but as two sovereign beings committed to the alchemy of intimacy, where every day is a return to the inner altar of truth, where every wound unearthed is held, not judged, where every ego death is celebrated as a step toward liberation. Because what Jung knew, and what the modern world often forgets, is that real love isn't a feeling. It's a forge, a place where your identity melts so your essence can emerge. And no bond on earth, no sacred rite, no mythic archetype delivers that fire more reliably than a conscious marriage. It is the final frontier of adult initiation, the space where romance becomes reverence, where duality dissolves into divine polarity, where the masculine and feminine don't compete, they co-create. This is why marriage terrifies the unconscious, because it doesn't care about your facade. It doesn't care about your curated persona. It will bring forth every unresolved trauma, every suppressed longing, every mask you've worn to keep from being fully known. And still, it will ask you to stay, to keep showing up, to keep burning, to keep becoming, until one day you look at each other, not as lovers trying to survive another season, but as witnesses to a sacred evolution. Two people who didn't escape themselves through partnership, but found themselves inside it. And in that moment, you understand the real purpose of marriage was never about happiness. It was always about wholeness. And now you are whole. And still, you choose each other. You choose each other not because you need to, not because of fear, obligation, or tradition, but because you want to. Because in the sacred fires of conflict, you found courage. In the stillness after argument, you found grace. And in the years of peeling back every mask, you found not just each other, you found God. Not the God in the sky, but the God that speaks in mirrors. The God that hides inside devotion. The God that whispers through presence, through breath, through the quiet bravery of staying. And this is love redefined. Not the dopamine spike, not the romantic high, but the sacred descent into the most honest parts of the soul, where vows aren't just promises, they're portals, spoken not just to the person in front of you, but to the self that only emerges in relationship. And now, after all the unraveling, after all the nights where leaving might have felt easier, you understand. Marriage is not a reward. Marriage is the path. It is the monastery where egos are humbled, the sanctuary where souls are seen, in the classroom, where both heartbreak and healing become teachers, you no longer resist. Because when you've walked through that fire and stayed, when you've died 1,000 tiny deaths and kept choosing to resurrect, you no longer wonder if you chose the right person. You become the right person. Not perfect, not polished, but present. Fully, fiercely, sacredly present. And that presence, that is a real marriage. Not the one the world praises, but the one the soul remembers. The soul remembers not the flowers, not the rings, not the picture-perfect vows whispered under sunset skies. It remembers the moments that broke you and the hands that helped rebuild you. It remembers the nights of silence where nothing was said, but everything was felt. It remembers the mirror held steady when your reflection scared even you. And most of all, it remembers the steady, unshakable truth that echoed through every season of doubt, every test of trust, every collapse and every rising. You stayed, not out of fear, not out of comfort, but out of conscious choice. And in that choice, you became something eternal. Because the real purpose of marriage is not to keep love alive, but to keep awakening it again and again and again, to meet the same soul through different eyes, to fall in love 100 times with a person who's never stopped changing, to become the soil for their transformation, even as they become the sun for yours. This is not romance. This is not myth. This is mysticism. And those who dare to walk this path, to love with eyes wide open, to surrender without disappearing, to integrate, instead of idealize, they do not just build a life together, they build a temple made not of stone, but of scars, of sweat, of truth told at 3 a.m. when the ego is gone and only the soul remains. And within that temple, you don't worship each other. You worship what you've become together. And in that final sacred knowing, you realize the real purpose of marriage was never to find safety in each other's arms, but to find freedom in each other's eyes. Freedom not as escape, but as revelation. The revelation that to love this deeply, to stay this wholly, to surrender this honestly, is the most radical act of liberation a human being can choose. Because nothing holds a mirror to your unconscious like love that doesn't flinch. And nothing transforms you more than a union that doesn't run. So in the end, marriage is not the destination. It's the initiation. The soul's slow climb into sovereignty through the scaffolding of shared struggle. The dismantling of fantasy so that real connection can be forged. Not in perfection, but in presence. And for those who are brave enough to walk that path, not because it's easy, but because it's true, they discover something rare, something sacred, something the world forgets, but the psyche never does. That the fire of marriage, when fed with truth, doesn't just warm the body, it illuminates the soul. And in that glow, you see each other clearly, not as saviors, not as soulmates, but as sacred mirrors, inviting each other again and again into the highest act of love, not to become one, but to become whole, not by dissolving into one another, but by standing side by side as two sovereign beings whose love is not born of need, but of knowing. Knowing that the path to divinity wins through the terrain of the human, through the mess, through the mundane, through the mornings where love looks like dishes and discipline, more than poetry and passion. And still, you stay, not because it's easy, but because it is worth it, because something holy is being carved in the space between you, something fierce, something true, something eternal. This is not the kind of marriage that society trains you for. This is not the performative theater of matching outfits and filtered smiles. This is the gritty, mystical, soul-altering ceremony that Jung knew was possible when two people use each other, not to escape the self, but to face it, to become conscious through communion, to integrate through intimacy, to awaken not in isolation, but in the divine friction of real partnership. And when you arrive there, when you have died and been reborn 1,000 times in their arms, when you have watched your illusions shatter and still chosen to rebuild with your bare hands, you understand something unshakable. That marriage is not about finding your other half. It's about becoming whole in the presence of another who is doing the same. And when you both rise in that wholeness, not as fantasy, but as fact, your love becomes untouchable. Not because it's flawless, but because it's free. Free of projection, free of illusion, free of fear. And in that freedom, you don't just have a marriage, you have a masterpiece. So now you understand. Marriage was never about losing yourself. It was never about safety or structure or static roles. It was never about completing each other. It was always about awakening each other. It was the fire chosen by your soul to burn away the inauthentic, to expose the unconscious, to elevate the ordinary into the extraordinary. It was the mirror you could not escape, and the only one clear enough to show you who you truly are, beneath the mask, beneath the fear, beneath the myth. This is what Jung meant when he called marriage the individuation of two beings, side by side, into the fullness of themselves. Not two halves becoming one, but two wholes becoming divine witnesses to each other's transformation. And that is the kind of love the world cannot manufacture, society cannot define, and time cannot diminish. The kind of love that stays, that deepens, that liberates. So if you ever wondered what marriage was truly for, it's not for completion. It's not for comfort. It's not even for happiness. It is for wholeness. And when you choose it for that reason, when you stay for that reason, when you rise, break, heal, and choose again for that reason, you no longer have a marriage. You have a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, you don't just survive love. You become it. There is no mirror in this world more brutally honest than marriage. It does not flatter. It does not filter. It does not pause. It reflects raw, relentless, and sacred the fractured architecture of your psyche. You can run from enemies, lie to friends, manipulate strangers, but in marriage, you are naked. And the soul standing across from you is not just your partner, it is your fate, disguised as flesh. You thought love would be your salvation. You believed the fairy tales, the Instagram quotes, the Hollywood daydreams. But now, you sit in the quiet war of shared silence, realizing this is not just a relationship. This is a battlefield between who you are and who you pretend to be. Marriage is not romance. It is alchemy, the sacred fire that burns away illusion, that exposes your shadows, that resurrects your forgotten wounds like ghosts knocking at midnight. The very things you buried come to dine at your kitchen table. They wear your voice. They echo in your arguments. They sleep in your bed. Because marriage, real marriage, is psychological warfare, not against your spouse, but against the fractured selves you refuse to integrate. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And marriage, the truest kind, is the great revealer, the mirror that cannot be escaped, the test you cannot cheat, the divine confrontation that forces you to face yourself. You thought you were choosing a partner, but the psyche chooses opposites, not for comfort, but for growth. Your partner is not your twin flame. They are your unconscious given legs and breath. The traits you repress, they embody. The insecurities you hide, they trigger. The wounds you deny, they press precisely, persistently, painfully. This is no accident. This is the crucible, the place where egos die and souls are forged. Most people don't marry a person, they marry a fantasy. And when that fantasy dies as it must, they believe love has ended. But love has only just begun. Because the death of the illusion is the birth of transformation. And transformation is brutal. There will be days when you see your partner not as they are, but through the lens of your childhood pain, when every criticism feels like your father's disapproval, when every silence sounds like your mother's neglect. Marriage dredges it all up, not to torment you, but to free you. But most don't stay long enough to see it. They flee. They find someone new and repeat the pattern again and again because they believe the enemy is external. They don't realize. Every unresolved shadow will resurrect itself in the next partner and the next until you face the root within. Marriage is the final exam of your inner work. It does not require perfection but presence. It does not demand performance but courage. The courage to say, this is who I am, broken, complex, unpolished, and I'm willing to grow. But growth is not pretty. It is not date nights and matching pajamas. It is emotional surgery with no anesthesia. It is shedding the masks you didn't know you were wearing. It is letting your partner see the parts of you you've kept hidden from everyone, including yourself. And when you do, when the masks are off, and the wounds are bare, and the illusions are shattered, something miraculous happens. Intimacy, real intimacy. Not the sugary performance sold in romance novels, but the gritty, sacred vulnerability of being fully seen and still chosen. Marriage is not the end of loneliness. It is the beginning of your encounter with the parts of yourself you abandoned long ago. It is not about finding the right person. It is about becoming the person who can meet the right one with open eyes, steady hands, and a heart that has been baptized by fire. Because every argument is an invitation. Every misunderstanding is a doorway. Every emotional trigger is a compass pointing inward to something within you that still needs healing. But most people don't listen. They blame, they point, they demand change from the other without realizing the battlefield is within. You cannot ask for a safe marriage if you are a danger to yourself. You cannot build trust if you lie to your own soul. You cannot demand vulnerability if you wear a mask every day. Marriage will not fix your inner emptiness. It will magnify it. It will echo through the hallways of your home until you are forced to confront the cavern inside you, the one you've spent a lifetime avoiding. And yet, this is the beauty of it. Marriage is not supposed to make you happy. It is supposed to make you conscious. Because in the end, you will realize your partner is not your problem. They are your mirror. The way they love you or fail to reveals the way you love yourself. The way they trigger you or soothe you exposes the way you treat your own soul. And the way they walk with you in your darkest hours teaches you everything about what it means to be human, flawed, and worthy. This is the test, not of romance, not of compatibility, but of depth, of character, of soul. And only those who are willing to burn, to let the illusions die, will find what marriage truly offers. Not comfort, not perfection, but the rare, sacred path to becoming whole. The rest, they will keep searching, keep blaming, keep cycling, wondering why love always seems to fail them, never realizing it was never about love. It was about truth. And truth is not always kind, but it is always liberating. You will not pass this test by charming your way through it. You will not pass by quoting books or repeating the words of therapists or influencers. Marriage is not impressed by intellect. It does not bow to eloquence. It listens only to truth, the kind that leaks from your bones when you're too tired to pretend, the kind that cracks through your voice when you run out of excuses, the kind that lives beneath all your polished personas and social masks. Because marriage will not fall in love with your mask. It will fall in love with your shadow, or it will leave. Do you understand the gravity of that? You are not just loving someone else. You are choosing to become the kind of person who can carry love without dropping it every time your ego is bruised. You are choosing to stand firm when your inner child wants to run. You are choosing to stay soft when your trauma screams to shut down. This is the discipline most will never speak of, because discipline in love is not about control, it's about surrender. The daily decision to show up, speak truth, and listen deeply, even when your defenses beg you to do otherwise. It is waking up on the day you don't feel in love and loving anyway. It is offering peace in the middle of an argument because you care more about connection than victory. It is saying, I was wrong. Not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough to hold your pride in check. This is the battlefield of marriage. Not the loud wars, but the quiet choices. The way you pause instead of attack. The way you breathe instead of blame. The way you remember that the person before you is not the enemy, but the echo of your own unfinished story. Marriage teaches you what you never learned in childhood, how to sit with discomfort, how to endure contradiction, how to offer grace in the middle of someone else's storm, and most of all, how to face the storms within yourself. Because here's the raw truth. Every argument you have is rooted in belief. Not the words being said, but the meaning you assign to them, the wound they touch, the story they trigger. Marriage is a crucible of these stories. Every room you enter together is a stage for the myths you carry. You think it's about the dishes, the schedules, the money. But what it's really about is abandonment, rejection, fear of being unseen, fear of being unworthy. You think you're fighting over what happened. You're not. You're fighting over what it meant to you. You're defending your past, projecting it onto your present, and calling it communication. This is why marriage is spiritual, not religious. Spiritual in the deepest, most harrowing sense, because it requires you to dissolve the self you cling to become the one who can love with open hands and an undefended heart. Do you think that's easy? Of course it's not. That's why so few make it. But those who do, who survive the internal collapse, who rebuild from truth instead of fantasy, they find something most never will. A love that has stared into the abyss and stayed. A love that doesn't vanish at the first sign of fear. A love that walks with you through the ruins of your ego and still whispers, I'm not going anywhere. That love, the one that sees all of you and stays, cannot be found until you are willing to be seen, fully, flawed, fragmented, and still worthy. And to offer the same, because marriage is not where you hide your weakness. It's where your weakness is baptized in acceptance. And your partner, if they are doing their inner work, will not judge your wounds, they will hold them. Not fix, not lecture, not shame, but hold like a sacred flame between trembling hands. This is why marriage, real marriage, is rare. Not because it's hard, but because it's honest. And honesty is terrifying to those still in love with their illusions. You cannot marry for peace if you have not made peace with yourself. You cannot expect stability from a union that exists to make you unstable, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because everything that is unstable in you must surface. It must be seen. It must be healed. And healing is messy. It's crying on the floor at 2 a.m. because something your partner said shattered a belief you didn't know you had. It's realizing you've been withholding affection, not because of them, but because you're terrified of vulnerability. It's choosing to forgive not just them, but yourself for the ways you showed up when you didn't know better. Marriage will break you open. That's the point. Not to destroy you, but to rebuild you into someone capable of carrying love without conditions, without games, without the armor you thought you needed. This is your test, not to prove your worth, but to meet it in the eyes of someone who sees you not as a fantasy, but as a soul in progress, and loves you anyway. Most people mistake marriage for a destination, a final arrival into the arms of comfort, companionship, and completion. But marriage is not a place, it is a process, an unfolding, a descent into the labyrinth of the self with another, as your mirror as your mentor, and your mentor as your wound. It does not end at I do. That is only where the dream ends and the work begins. Because no vow, no ring, no ceremony can protect you from the parts of yourself you have not yet confronted. The altar is not where the commitment is sealed. The commitment is sealed in the daily deaths of the ego, in the morning forgiveness after a night of distance, in the choice to understand when judgment would be easier, in the patience to learn your partner's language instead of demanding they speak yours. That is the work, not romantic, not glamorous, but holy. And it begins the moment you realize your partner is not yours to control, to fix, or to mold. They are not here to meet your every need. They are not responsible for your happiness. They are not your savior. They are your equal, a sovereign soul with their own shadows, battles, and evolution. And marriage, if entered consciously, is where two sovereigns meet, not to conquer, but to co-create. But co-creation requires a death, the death of the fantasy self, the one who never gets triggered, the one who is always right, the one who believes they've already healed. That self must die. Because the moment you enter real intimacy, you will meet the child inside you, the one still aching to be held, still terrified of being abandoned, still afraid of being truly seen. Marriage will expose that child, not to shame them, but to invite them home. And when your partner holds space for that child, something ancient happens, a healing, not just in you, but in your lineage, in your ancestors, in the stories passed down through generations of broken homes and silenced emotions. Because when you choose to stay, to listen, to love through the trigger, you are breaking a chain. You are becoming the first in your bloodline to love without fear. That is no small thing. It is a revolution. But do not expect it to be easy. The mind will rebel. The ego will scream. The old self, the one who protected you through trauma, who kept you safe through disconnection, will not go quietly. You will sabotage. You will withdraw. You will want to run. Not because love is wrong, but because it's real. And real love requires real presence, real accountability, real humility. And most are not ready for that. They say they want love, but they mean validation. They say they want connection, but they mean control. They say they want partnership, but they mean projection. Marriage will show you the difference. It will strip you down to your essence, not to shame you, but to show you what is real, what is lasting, what is worthy of being built, and what must be left behind. You will learn that peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of understanding. You will learn that love is not a feeling, it is a practice. a decision, a discipline. You will learn that safety is not created by promises, but by the courage to reveal yourself without armor. And above all, you will learn that marriage is not the story you were told, it is the story you choose to write. Day after day, wound after wound, truth after truth. But only if you are willing to meet yourself in the silence, willing to admit when you are wrong, willing to apologize not just to your partner, but to the parts of yourself you betrayed in the name of pride, willing to grow, not for them, but because the person you are becoming demands it. This is the cost of love, not flowers, not gifts, but the death of illusion. And in its place, intimacy fierce, fragile, and forged in fire. The kind that cannot be faked. The kind that holds you when you are too broken to hold yourself. The kind that sees through your defenses and whispers, I still choose you. But that whisper, that sacred vow, can only be heard when you are finally still enough to listen. Still enough to stop running. Still enough to face the parts of you that have never known peace. Still enough to become the person worthy of the love you seek. And once you do, once you surrender, once you soften, once you see your partner not as an adversary, but as your greatest teacher, you will understand. Marriage was never meant to save you. It was meant to awaken you, to break you, to strip you, so that the version of you who walks out the other side is no longer a child begging for love, but a sovereign, whole, awakened being, capable of giving it. And now we enter the sacred chamber most fear to touch, the domain of accountability. Because love without accountability is a fantasy, and accountability without love is tyranny. Marriage holds both in its trembling palms. It asks of you not only tenderness, but truth. Brutal, unwavering truth, the kind that burns your ego but cleanses your soul. In marriage, there is no hiding behind your potential. No more weaponizing silence. No more gaslighting your way out of responsibility. Every word you say, every word you don't, carves itself into the architecture of your union. And the house you build together will either be made of truth or termites. You think your tone doesn't matter, that rolling your eyes was just a moment, that avoiding the hard conversation was keeping the peace? No, it was laying bricks of resentment, invisible but heavy. And one day, you will look around and wonder why the intimacy has vanished, why the laughter has dried up, why the warmth is gone. It didn't leave. You drove it out with tiny betrayals, death by 1,000 self-deceptions. This is why marriage is for the brave, because accountability means looking your partner in the eye after you failed them and saying, I did this, it wasn't okay, and I will do better. No excuses, no defenses, no spin. Just a raw, guttural confession of a person choosing to grow. And not just once, but again, and again, and again, because you will fail them, and they will fail you. This is inevitable. What matters is not the perfection of your actions, but the sincerity of your repair. Can you own it? Can you hold their hurt without collapsing into shame? Can you remain present through the discomfort long enough to rebuild trust? Because that's what real love does. It stays, not when it's easy, but when it's excruciating. When every cell in your body wants to run, defend, deflect, and instead you choose to lean in, to ask, what part of you did I just harm? And then listen, truly listen, without needing to be right. That's the marriage most never reach, because it requires the death of the persona. And most would rather protect their mask than protect their bond. But if you can do this, if you can practice radical accountability, something shifts. Trust is no longer a fragile glass. It becomes a living, breathing presence between you. You learn how to rupture and repair. You learn how to hurt and heal. And in that rhythm, in that sacred dance, you become unshakable. Not because you never break, but because you always return. Do you see? This is not weakness. This is warrior work. This is inner revolution. To say, I will not let my past sabotage my present. To say, I will not let my pain dictate my pattern. To say, I will not project my trauma onto the one I love even when it hurts. That is the power of presence. And presence is not passive. It is the fiercest act of love you will ever perform. And your partner will feel it, not in grand gestures, but in the way you remember what they said when they thought you weren't listening, in the way you check your tone before it cuts, in the way you choose empathy over ego, not because it's easier, but because you made a vow not to abandon them, especially when it's hard. That is the real vow. Not the one spoken at the altar, but the one you live in the quiet spaces, the one that echoes when no one is watching, the one that turns you from a consumer of love into a creator of it. Because love is not something you find. It is something you build brick by brick, word by word, act by act, until it becomes a fortress no storm can touch. But you cannot build with someone else what you refuse to build within. That's why marriage begins with self-confrontation. Because the parts of you that avoid discomfort will avoid conflict. The parts of you that need control will strangle vulnerability. The parts of you that chase perfection will never tolerate the humanity of your partner. And so the work begins not in them, but in you. To grieve the fantasy of who you thought you had to be. To strip away the performance. To heal the wounded child within you, so you can love with adult hands. Not needy hands. Not controlling hands, but hands that hold steady, sacred, and strong. That is marriage at its highest expression. Not a merger of needs, but a union of wholeness. Two people, awake to their shadows, committed to their evolution, and brave enough to say, I will not let fear run this love. I will not let my past own this future. I will not abandon myself, and I will not abandon you. That is the vow. That is the test. That is the sacred terror of becoming someone worthy of the very thing you crave most. So in the end, you must ask yourself not, do I love them? But can I face myself with them? Can I stand in the raw, unfiltered light of truth and not flinch? Can I let go of being right, being praised, being perfect to become real? Because marriage is not the reward for having it all figured out. It is the initiation, the sacred crucible where the parts of you still hiding must come into the light, where love is not a possession, but a proving ground. And not the proving of performance, but of presence. The kind of presence that holds steady through chaos. The kind that sees the monster in the mirror and chooses to stay. You will lose the fairy tale. You will bury the illusion. You will grieve the version of love sold to you by songs, screens, and stories. But in that grave, something holy will rise. A love forged in fire, tempered by truth. Made unbreakable not because it never cracks, but because it never lies. A love where two become not one, but whole, side by side. And when you reach that place, when you look into your partner's eyes, not as a savior, not as a projection, but as a soul who chose to walk through the fire with you, you will understand marriage was never meant to complete you. It was meant to reveal you. And what it reveals, if you're willing, is the you that was always there, before the masks, before the wounds, before the world tamed you, the you who is finally ready to love fully, to live consciously, to walk beside another as nothing less than your whole unrelenting, untamed, immortal self. Burn the mask, face the test, become